The wagon had barely rattled away before Gabriel felt the eyes of the whole town stabbing into his back like sharpened knives. He kept his shoulders square, her hand still in his, but the weight of their smirks, their whispers, their cruel laughter followed him through every step. He led her to his horse, a big bay gelding restless beneath the bridle, and helped her mount. She swung into the saddle with surprising ease, her movements confident, as though she had worked with horses all her life. Gabriel mounted behind, the two of them framed in silence as the town receded behind them, swallowed by the rising dusk. The prairie stretched before them, wide and endless, a sea of grass painted gold by the dying sun. For a long while neither spoke. The rhythm of hooves on dry earth filled the air, steady and grounding, a contrast to the storm of thoughts swirling in Gabriel's mind. He had expected hesitation, clumsiness, maybe even fear. Instead, this woman, his wife now, by law and by vow, sat tall in the saddle, her posture commanding, her gaze scanning the horizon as though she had always belonged out here. It was Gabriel who broke the silence first. His voice came out rougher than he intended, like gravel scraped against stone. "You've got a name?" he asked. She turned her head slowly, her expression unreadable in the amber light. "Margaret," she said, "but most call me Maggie." The name fit her somehow, solid and unpretentious, with a weight that matched the set of her shoulders. Gabriel gave a small nod, storing the name away, letting it settle in the hollow spaces of his solitude. Another stretch of silence followed, this one different, less heavy, more searching. Finally, Maggie spoke, her words steady but edged with a caution born of many battles. "You expected someone else." It wasn't a question, just a truth laid bare between them. Gabriel gripped the reins tighter, staring straight ahead. He could lie, could say she was everything he imagined, but his nature had never tolerated dishonesty. "I expected different," he admitted. "But you came. That counts for more than most." Her laugh surprised him. It was low, rolling, almost musical in its own way, and it carried not mockery but something close to relief. "Different," she echoed. "I've been called worse." She looked away then, toward the fading sun, and for the first time her confidence cracked just slightly, just enough for Gabriel to glimpse the tenderness hidden beneath the iron. She had heard insults all her life, that much was plain. She had learned to meet them head-on, to turn them aside with strength and wit. But here, on the open road, away from the eyes of the town, she let a fragment of her vulnerability slip through the armor. They rode on, the land rising and falling beneath them like the back of some ancient beast. The cabin appeared at last, crouched at the base of a ridge, smoke curling from the chimney where Gabriel had left a fire banked earlier that morning. He dismounted first, then helped her down, though she hardly needed it. The moment her boots touched the ground, she looked over the place with eyes that missed nothing. The corral, the worn boards of the barn, the patch of earth Gabriel had tried to till into a garden, she saw it all, and he felt himself strangely exposed, as though she were weighing not just the land but the man who kept it. Inside, the cabin was small but solid, the work of hands that had needed something to build when the nights grew too long. Gabriel lit the lamps, casting warm light across the rough-hewn table, the bed against the far wall, the shelves lined with tools and a few carefully kept books. Maggie stepped inside, ducking slightly beneath the doorframe, and inhaled the scent of wood smoke and leather. "You built this yourself," she said, not as a question but as an acknowledgement. He nodded once. "Every board." She walked the room slowly, touching the edge of the table, the worn chair, the mantel over the fireplace. Finally, she turned back to him. "You didn't expect me," she said again, softer this time. "But I came, and if you'll have me, I'll work this place till my bones give out. I'm not afraid of dirt or sweat. I'm not afraid of stairs. But I won't stay where I'm not wanted." Her words hung heavy between them. Gabriel felt the truth of them sink into him, pressing against the doubts that had plagued him since she stepped from that wagon. He had ridden for a companion, someone to ease the loneliness gnawing at the edges of his life. What he had received was something larger, something fiercer, something far more than he expected, but perhaps also exactly what he needed. He moved closer then, his voice quiet but certain. "I wouldn't have you anywhere else." And though the words were simple, they carried a weight that went deeper than the vows written in letters. Maggie's eyes softened, just a flicker, but enough to melt the hardness of her stance. She set down her satchel, pulled out a folded piece of cloth, and began to spread it over the table. "Then let's start with supper," she said. "If I'm to be your wife, you'll need to eat more than beans and black coffee." The cabin filled with the sound of clattering pans, the hiss of oil, the low rumble of Maggie's voice as she worked. Gabriel sat quietly at the table, watching her, feeling something shift in the very bones of his solitude. For the first time in years, the silence did not feel like a curse. It felt like space that could be filled with laughter, with conversation, with life. And though he knew the town would not stop their jeers, he also knew that what had begun this day could not be undone by the sneers of others. When Maggie finally placed the skillet on the table, steam rising in the lamplight, Gabriel looked at her across the food she had conjured with such simple, unshaken confidence. He lifted his fork, paused, and gave her the faintest smile, small, but real. "You're not what I expected," he said quietly. "But maybe that's the point." Morning broke with the kind of sharp prairie light that shows every flaw and every promise. Gabriel rose early, as he always did, pulling on boots worn from years of solitude, but when he stepped outside he was met with the sight of Maggie already awake. She was in the corral, sleeves rolled high, her arms swinging with the rhythm of someone who knew work and welcomed it. She was chopping wood with a heavy axe, each blow cracking through the still air, her body steady, unshaken. Gabriel stood for a long moment watching her, the doubts that had haunted him thinning like mist under the sun. Whatever people might say, this was no helpless burden. This was a partner, strong and unafraid of labor. But strength alone was not what made her remarkable. When she set the axe aside and caught sight of him, she smiled, a brief, startlingly gentle expression that softened the edges of her sighs, her scars, her defiance. "Coffee's on," she said, as if she had been part of this ranch all her life. Gabriel felt something stir in his chest, something he had buried long ago. He nodded, and for once words failed him. By midday, word had already spread through Ash Hollow that Gabriel Ward had taken home the woman from the wagon. The gossip traveled faster than wildfire, twisted and sharpened with every telling. By the time Gabriel rode into town for supplies, the whispers had become jeers. Men leaned on fence posts, smirking. Women cast pitying glances, some shaking their heads as though he had been cursed. And at the saloon porch, a group of cowhands waited, itching to provoke. "Well, Ward," one drawled as Gabriel passed. "How's the bed holdin' up under that mountain you married?" Laughter erupted, cruel and coarse. Gabriel halted, his hand tightening on the reins. His instinct was to keep walking, as he had done his whole life, ignore, retreat, let silence shield him. But silence no longer shielded just him. It shielded her too, and for the first time, that was not enough. He turned slowly, his eyes hard as the ridge stone. "Say another word," he said, his voice low, "and you'll be chewing through broken teeth." The saloon porch went still. The cowhands looked at one another, uncertain. They had expected him to shrink back, to laugh it off, to carry the humiliation in silence. They had not expected fire. Gabriel left them gaping and walked on, his jaw set, his heart hammering not with shame but with the fierce knowledge that he would not allow anyone to dishonor her. That evening, when he returned, Maggie was mending a tear in one of his shirts by the fire. He told her nothing of the encounter, but she looked up, her eyes searching his face, and somehow she knew. "They won't stop," she said quietly. "Not unless you show them who you are with me beside you." Her tone was not pleading, not fearful, but certain. She understood the world better than most. Mockery did not fade on its own. It had to be silenced. Days later, the chance came. The town hosted a harvest gathering, the one time of year when everyone, rich and poor, cattle baron and ranch hand, gathered under the same roof. Gabriel would have stayed away, but Maggie insisted they go. "We'll face them together," she said, fastening her hair back with firm, deliberate hands. "You and I." The hall was thick with laughter, the smell of roasted meat, the heat of too many bodies pressed into one place. As soon as Gabriel and Maggie entered, conversation faltered. Heads turned. A few snickers rose from the corners. Someone muttered loud enough for half the room to hear, "Looks like Ward brought his ox to market." The cruelty cut sharp, but before Gabriel could respond, Maggie stepped forward. She walked to the center of the room, her presence commanding silence, and raised her voice. "You've all had your jokes," she said, steady and clear. "You've all had your whispers. But I'll tell you plain, I am his wife. I came when he called, I'll work his land, I'll share his fire, and I'll outlast the laughter of any man or woman here. If you think less of me, then step forward now and say it to my face." The hall was silent. No one moved. Maggie's eyes swept the room, unyielding. Finally, Gabriel joined her, standing at her side, his hand resting on hers in plain view of them all. "She's mine," he said, his voice carrying through the hush. "And I'll stand against the whole West before I let one of you make her less than that." It was not a challenge shouted in anger but a vow spoken like steel. The weight of it hung heavy, undeniable. Slowly, the sneers melted. No one stepped forward, no one dared, and in that silence, respect, grudging, reluctant, but real, took root where mockery had thrived. The music started again, hesitant at first, then swelling as the night moved forward. Gabriel and Maggie stayed, not as outcasts but as something different, something stronger. People began to see her not as the butt of a cruel joke but as a woman who had walked into a hall full of enemies and left with her head high, her husband beside her. Later, when the night had thinned and the stars stretched endless above the prairie, Gabriel and Maggie rode home together. He looked at her, her profile lit by moonlight, and felt the quiet certainty of a man who had asked for companionship and been given something far greater. He had expected fragility, but he had been given strength. He had expected a shadow, but he had been given fire. Back at the cabin, with the lantern glowing low, Gabriel finally spoke the words that had lived and spoken in his chest since the wagon first arrived. "You're not what I asked for," he said, his voice soft but steady. "You're more, and if the whole West turns against us, I'll still thank God every day that it was you who stepped down from that wagon." Maggie looked at him for a long moment, her eyes gleaming with something fierce and tender all at once. Then she smiled, not with mockery or defense but with quiet triumph. "Then we'll show the West what a mistake it was to laugh at us," she whispered. And in the silence that followed, the loner rancher and the woman twice his size became something the prairie had not seen before, a force no ridicule could break, no sneer could diminish, a partnership forged not in dreams but in defiance, in truth, in fire. Slow, dramatic opening, hushed, suspenseful tone. The wagon rolled into Ash Hollow at sundown, its wheels groaning, its dust choking the air. Everyone watched, and one man waited, the loner rancher, Gabriel Ward. A man of silence, a man of solitude, a man who had sent letters across the miles for a bride. He had pictured a small figure stepping down, someone fragile, someone gentle, someone he could shelter from the storms of the West. Pause, lower tone, edge of surprise. But the woman who climbed down from that wagon was nothing like he expected. She was twice his size. Broad-shouldered, steady-footed, her bonnet askew, her gaze cutting across the crowd like a blade. Increase intensity, mocking laughter SFX under voice. The town burst into laughter. Men slapped their knees. Women whispered behind hands. Cruel words cut through the air like whips. "Careful, Ward, she'll break the horse before she mounts it." Firm, strong tone, Maggie's voice commanding. But she didn't bow, didn't flinch. She looked them dead in the eye. "You'll not find me fragile," she declared. "And if any man doubts I can swing an axe, let him stand where the tree falls." Beat, silence, music drop, narrator voice steady, and in that silence, Gabriel Ward, the loner rancher, made his choice. He took her hand, rough against his own, and he said the words that silenced the town. "Then you're home." Shift tone, journey, wind sounds, hooves on dirt road. They rode out together, across the prairie, into the night, into a cabin built of loneliness and wood smoke. He had asked for a companion. What he got was a force of nature. Slower, Maggie's voice, softer now. "I'm here," she told him. "You sent for a wife. And I came. I'll work your land, I'll share your fire, but I won't stay where I'm not wanted." Pause, narrator voice thoughtful, swelling music. And Gabriel, the man who had spent years with only silence as company, found himself saying words he never thought he'd say again. "I wouldn't have you anywhere else." Montage tone, faster pacing, rustic SFX. Maggie worked, she chopped wood, she cooked, she carried herself with pride. But the town didn't stop. Whispers turned to jeers, cruelty spread, and for the first time in his life, Gabriel Ward did not walk away. Harsher tone, bar brawl tension, boots on wood. At the saloon, a voice mocked. "How's the bed holdin' up under that mountain, Ward?" Gabriel turned. His voice was low, deadly. "Say another word, and you'll be chewing through broken teeth." Beat, silence. They had expected weakness. They found steel. Shift, festive SFX, fiddles, chatter. At the harvest gathering, Maggie walked into the hall with him. And the sneers rose again, until she raised her voice, clear, fearless. You've had your jokes, you've had your whispers, but, I'll outlast every one of them. If you think less of me, say it to my face. Strong beat, silence, fire crackle. No one spoke, no one dared. Gabriel took her hand in front of them all. She's mine, he said, and I'll stand against the whole West before I let one of you make her less than that. Music swells, triumphant tone. And in that moment, the loner rancher was no longer alone. The woman twice his size was no joke, no burden, no mistake. Together, they were a storm, a fire, a vow. Closing line, slow, emotional, fade out. He had waited for a bride. What he got was more. What he got was the one woman strong enough to stand beside him, and fierce enough to silence the West.